So let's kick it off with welcome to our NPACS FIMS learning webinar focusing on facts. A couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording this and you will be able to find a link to this in our knowledge base. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter it in the Q&A below. As most of you know, I'm Amy Strom, the Director of Client Success here at NPACT. And today you'll be hearing from Robin as she reviews the facts module. And we do have Leanne available on our Q&A. So with that, let's quick look at today's agenda. Today we'll be covering some of the important features of facts, integration information, the translation of journal key codes, adding or closing investment accounts, and as well as retiring a fund versus closing a fund within a pool, and keeping facts in your GL and balance. Robin will end it up with reviewing some reporting tips. So with that, I'm going to pass this on to Robin to take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Welcome, everybody. Let me just share my screen and we will get started. Okay, let me bring up my facts module. Okay, so welcome all. And facts, today's primary focus is going to be in the facts module. And facts stands for Fund and Account Tracking System. And we're going to start with some features that are helpful when working in the facts module. And the first one is this little button right up here, the pool processing status button. This essentially is a very neat way to see what status each of your pools is in. And there's a little drop down. So I have more than one investment pool, and my equity pool A down here is telling me that I'm in cycle 10. It's giving me my ending date, my ending market value, but it's telling me that I need to rerun my pool allocation processing. So that's the status of pool A. I also have pool B. This one says run pool allocation processing, meaning that I have not actually run the process yet. And if you look into the accounts window, you can actually see the investment accounts that are attached to this particular pool. I have 3. So the different options that you might see would be unreconciled accounts exist. And that means if you've got multiple investment accounts attached to your pool, you may not have reconciled all of them. Run the pool allocation processing, which is what we're seeing here, meaning that's my next step in the process. Another message that you might see would be run necessary facts reports and then the facts to edit. So I have gone through my allocation processing process, and I just need to go to the next step to run my reports, unitization, reconciliation report, and then post everything in facts and over to general ledger. And then the last one is rerun pool allocation processing. So essentially, maybe some journal entries were booked to the same period and they have been created in facts, so that you need to take them into account and either exclude them from the current facts cycle or include them in your ending balance. So facts pool processing status, great little tool to quickly see all of your pools and where each one of them is, especially if you have a lot of pools. The next thing I'm going to show you is when you're looking at your transactions. So I'm in the reconciliation super tab. This is where you're actually going to come to reconcile your investment accounts. You're going to see under transactions, if I double click on any one of these transactions, down in the bottom right-hand corner, you can actually view the journal history. So you can view the entry from general ledger. So if I click on view journal history, this is actually going to show me the other side of this. So my 14100 account, which is that particular pool, was a $19,000 debit. Here's the 2 credits that were made for that particular transaction. So if you're trying to get a look at the whole picture for a specific entry, you can do that by clicking on View Journal History. Under the pools super tab, so here's a listing of all of the investment pools that you currently have. And if you notice, there's a column that tells you what the GL account is. So this is a quick glance to know which one of your asset accounts is attached to the pool. It tells you what cycle it's in, your deposit account, your disbursement account. So that information is quickly visible over here, but you also have the ability of, let me go here. If I go to balances, the little balances tab, I can see all of the reconciled cycles for this particular pool, along with the ending market value and the date. But if you wanted to see a list of funds, if you just wanted a visual perspective on a list of funds that were in the pool for a certain period, if you highlight that line, that cycle line, and go to funds, that's going to give you a quick visual glance at which funds were part of the pool and what its ending market value was. We're going to take a look at a couple items that you have available to you under file maintenance, the file maintenance menu item. So the first one is change confirm dates. And what this tool does is it allows you to change the confirm date on a group or batch of transactions. This is helpful, especially if you have 10 or more and need to change the confirm date. So the confirm date itself is the date that FACS uses from the transaction to determine how the allocations are going to be allocated, or the gains and losses. That's pulling from the actual transaction. So an example of where this might be helpful is you ran your FACS reconciliation, allocated the earnings. The last step that you did for that previous quarter was to run your admin fees. Most likely your admin fees were run with a GL apply date of the last day of the month that you just reconciled in FACS. So this would be a great tool to update that whole batch of admin fees with a confirm date of the first day of the next month. You also have the ability to unpost a reconciled FACS cycle. So what this does, there's a little drop down where you can choose which pool. Let's say, for example, you had a donor that gave a huge gift, $1 million gift, and somehow the gift was posted to the wrong donor. Chances are you're going to want to reverse that FACS cycle and make sure that the earnings are allocated to the proper fund. So in order to do that, you just choose whichever pool you want to post. It tells you what that cycle was. And what this does is it's going to create reversing journal entries in General Ledger, since they're probably posted. It's going to create the reversing entries, and it's going to reopen that FACS cycle in FACS. The nice thing about doing this is when you go into your reconciliation tab to re-reconcile, it's going to auto-populate this information on the reconcile tab with whatever was entered when you reconciled that pool originally. So you don't have to remember what you put in there. All right, the next one under here is clear out an unposted cycle. So what this utility is used to do is delete the current cycle balance records created in accounts. So in other words, if you have been going through the reconcile tab for each one of the investment accounts in the pool, or if you've already run pool allocation processing, let's say that you realize you've put in the wrong gains and losses. You totally thought this was a different pool. This is a really good tool to clear out an unposted cycle. If you have multiple investment accounts you need to clear out, and you can clear out the balances, the account balances. All right, change your pool ID. So when you create the pool, you gave the pool an ID code. Let's say for some reason, change of bank, change of purpose, change of something, and you want to change the pool ID, that's something that you can do here. You just pull up the old pool ID or whatever the existing pool ID is, put in what you want for a new ID, and check the multiple transactions box, and that will update the pool ID for that pool. In addition, you also have the ability to change the investment account code, because once you create the pool or the investment accounts, that code cannot be, it's grayed out, you can't change it unless you're using one of the utilities. So you can change your investment account code. This one's good handy here because if the bank changes its name and the code just doesn't match what the new name is, this is a great way to make sure that your investment code matches your investment account. All right, so we also have given you the ability to define the labels. So when you go into your Reconcile tab to reconcile these investment accounts, down the left-hand side is a default set of labels. So the first one is realized gains, unrealized gains. This is where you come monthly or quarterly to plug in the information, gains and losses from your investment statements. If you look in this define facts labels, you're going to see that on the left-hand side is what the default label is, but you have the ability to change that label. And if you look at my disbursements line, I have changed that to transfers between accounts because the way that I use the disbursement line is if I have a pool that has multiple investment accounts, I might have a clearing account, which is where all of my transactions flow when they come into the fax module. I need to move that money around between the investment accounts so that it's properly represented as to which investment account it lives in. So to me, this is just a transfer between accounts line. So that's what I have done here on mine. And that's what I see when I go to reconcile. Now in the little box down below, it says show fax labels. You have a couple options here. You can show fax labels with the general ledger descriptions. In the way that it knows what descriptions to use is if I go to a pool and I go to my GL accounts tab, I have set up which GL accounts are going to be tied to each one of those lines in the Reconcile tab. And then on the gray side, on the right side of that, it tells me what the label is. So when you are defining your fax labels, you have the ability to not only show what the label is in fax, but you can also show the GL description of the account that it's mapped to from General Ledger. Or you could just show general ledger descriptions. And so those are your three options. This particular item is not in the fax module, but it pertains to the fax module. So if I go to Tools, System Utilities, System Options, there is a system option that's in General Ledger. And this is, so essentially, let's say that I've reconciled March in my fax module for the pool, and somebody creates an entry, whether it's an adjusting entry, whatever, in General Ledger that has a March date on it. When they post that in General Ledger, you have two options that you can choose from. You can either set that so that when on the edit report, it shows as a warning, hey, you're trying to post something to a closed pool cycle, or and it will let them, it'll still let them post through because it's just a warning. Or you can change it so that it's an actual error, and what'll happen is they will be prevented from posting. So there's two things that apply here that can be set, but remember it's under General Ledger instead of fax system options. All right. The next thing I got to show you is a little bit of integration. So I'm going to bring up in this as an FYI, this is one of the pages in the handout that you all will receive. So you can actually see how this works. So at the top section of this is a snip from my general ledger. And there's a couple different transactions in here. This happens to be a gift. So what happens when you post, the journal number in General Ledger becomes the document number in the fax module. So when the transaction's created, so if you're looking and comparing between the modules, if you're trying to figure out why you're out of balance, the journal number is the same as the document number on the transaction in FACS, because this screen at the bottom is the FACS is coming from the FACS module itself. The apply date becomes the confirm date. So that maps to the confirm date. And then your journal key code. So journal key codes in General Ledger can be used to group transactions together. For example, when you post gifts coming from the gift module, all of those General Ledger journal entries are created in General Ledger with a journal key of GI. And if you look up top, it says journal key GI. That's just another way for you to group transactions together. So if I wanted to run a journal history report, I could choose a set of dates from and through dates and say I only wanted to see anything that had a journal key of GI. So that's journal key codes. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how this impacts FACS in just a little bit. And then at the bottom here, fund ID, description, amount from the journal entry, all of that flows over to FACS as well, and it's part of the transaction itself. So we've got our fund ID, our description, and the dollar amount. So that's for transactions that are going from General Ledger to FACS. And then I'm going to scroll down to the next page. And this is for after you've reconciled FACS, the allocation entries have been created and they're sent back to General Ledger to be edited and posted. So if we look here, this top screenshot is my journal history report. Under reference number, I have equity 10. That's telling me that this is from my equity pool and this came from cycle 10. And then if you look to the left of that, the actual description, it tells me it's unrealized gains. It gives me the pool ID. It gives me the from and through date, and it even shows me the cycle right below it, which is 10. Just a tip, this report that I ran, this journal history report, in order to see that full description, I had to check the box that said expanded description. So when running that journal history, just make sure you check that box so you can see the whole description. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is the journal key codes. So the journal key codes are defined in a code table in General Ledger. So if I go to File Maintenance and I go down to General Ledger, and I go up to my journal key code maintenance. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So you have, in this case, AE, allocation and entries. I have AJ for adjustment journal. You can create your own journal keys if this is something that you want to be able to track. Like some people will create a journal key code for PR, for payroll entries. So each week or each month when they're entering journal entries for payroll, they're all coded as PR. This is helpful if they want to be able to run a report and see nothing but payroll entries. So that's the list here. Now let me just go back to, let me find somebody. Okay, so now I'm going to open my journal key code table again. All right, so this column right here that says FACS transaction type, there's different transaction types in here. So when you post a journal entry in General Ledger, what happens is if you debit or credit the investment pool account, what happens is it's going to create a transaction in the FACS module. So depending on what the transaction type is, will determine which one of these 5 grayed out lines is used. So the sum total, the net total of all of your transactions that are during this particular period, in this case, it's December 2017. If I was to go back to my transaction tab, I will see transactions, and let me sort this by confirm date. So anything that has, in this case, miscellaneous P is showing up in my fund miscellaneous. Let me go back to my code table here. All right. So anything that's going to flow into the fund miscellaneous is a miscellaneous P. So for example, allocation and entries would go there. General journal entries would go there. Anything that's coded with a gift P is going to show up in the gift line. So in that document that I created for all of you, I've explained which is going to flow into each one of these lines. And a lot of people are probably sitting there thinking, okay, well, why do I care? Why do I care about these, which line the transactions show up in? And to be totally honest, I'm of the opinion that I don't care which line they show up in, as long as the correct transactions are in the transactions tab and my net numbers are what it's supposed to be for what has cleared for the month, because these are strictly cleared transactions for that particular month. But it's something that people always kind of ask, how does it get to these little grayed out lines? Well, it all depends on what your journal key code maintenance table says. Now, the last column over here, fax account, this is saying disperse or deposit. What that is referring to here, if I go to pools, and I go to my pools little tab, if you notice at the bottom right here, there's two lines. One of them is deposit account code and the other one is disbursement account code. And both of them happen to be the same. So when transactions are posted in general ledger, they're created in fax, they are assigned an investment account. And what this is saying here is that regardless of whether it's a deposit account or a disbursement account, all transactions are going to be linked to this investment account for equity pool A. And I can actually see that when I go look at these transactions here. If I open a transaction, I can see that. Where's my account right here, pool C, for this particular transaction. So it is linked to each one of the transactions. All right. The next thing is adding or closing an investment account that's attached to the pool. So if you need to add a new investment account, you're going to go to the accounts tab. Let's say that your pool is expanding and it's picking up going into another type of investment. All you need to do is go to the accounts super tab, click on the new button, and what you're going to see, you're going to be able to give it a code. And as you can see, the code is grayed out. So once you have created this and started using it, you would have to use the utility to change the code. You can put a date opened, the name, address, any of this information that you want to fill in. You need to link it to a specific pool. So you would click the pool from the drop down, and then you need to create an initial balance. So you would click on the button to create an initial balance. And this is what that particular screen looks like. So you would put in the ending market value and the begin date. So most likely your begin date would be the last day of the previous cycle reconciled. So that's how you add a new investment account to the pool. How do you remove one? So what would happen is if you've got a pool that you're reconciling that has multiple investments and maybe one of them just happened to close, as you're going through the reconciliation process, let's see, for example, you're going to take all the money out of this particular investment account. So you would use that transfer between accounts line to put a negative dollar amount based on your ending balance. And that would calculate an ending balance of 0. You'd move that into one of the other investment accounts and you would finish processing your monthly reconciliation. Once you're done that, you're going to want to go back to the accounts tab and put in a date closed. When you put in a date closed, it's automatically excluded from your reconcile tab when you're looking at your investment accounts. So with a closed date, you don't have to look at something that you're no longer reconciling. So the next thing is, what is the difference between retiring a fund or closing a fund in a pool? Because that can be kind of confusing sometimes. So you could close a fund out of a pool, remove it from the pool 100%, but you're not retiring the fund. Maybe they've said to put the money into a money market, or it's moving into a different pool. So you can close a fund in the pool that's not retiring. You can close a fund out of the pool that is retiring. But the retire fund process is totally different from taking the fund out of the pool. So I'm going to go to fund module for a minute, and I'm going to show you where your retire a fund tool is. So under file maintenance, there is a utility to retire a fund. It opens a little window. What you're going to do is choose the fund that you want to retire. And what happens is it defaults into today's date, which happens to be the 10th, but you can change that if you wanted to retire it at a different date. When I click OK here, this screen, this is the only way I would ever follow through and say yes here to do I wish to continue. And the reason being is that this happens to be an endowment fund, and there's 0 balances in each one of the balances, and your total fund balance is 0. So I've had some people retire a fund, they've had maybe $100,000 in historic gifts and a negative $100,000 in available. The total fund balance is 0, but the individual balances are not. I would not retire this fund until I had taken care of the difference between the balances, even though the total fund balance is 0. By retiring a fund, what you're doing is it's putting a retired date on the fund record. It is marking the GL accounts as being inactive. So when you closed your current year, it's not going to create new GL accounts in the next year. If you were to book an entry to a fund during that particular year when there's still GL accounts, it will give you a warning on the edit reports that this is a retired fund, and is this really what you want to do? So that's kind of like a reminder to make sure you review your edit reports. And that goes for any edit report. Make sure you're not missing something or posting an entry to a fund that shouldn't be there. Now, if you want to remove the fund from the pool, there's no specific utility for that. All you need to do is make a journal entry to credit the investment pool and debit whatever asset account the money's being transferred to. The only trick is, because this sounds very simple, but the only trick is that the confirm date on the transaction itself needs to be the first day of the next cycle you're reconciling. So let's say that today's the 10th. I want to close the fund out of the pool as of the beginning of the month. I do not want FACS to allocate any earnings for the month of July. The only way you can do that is if all of your transactions, if there's multiple or if there's only one, they all have the same date, and that's the first day of the month. At that point, FACS looks at this and says, oh, this fund has a total 0 balance on the first day of the cycle. It's not going to allocate any earnings. If there is a transaction that has 1 day later, even if it's the second, it's going to allocate pennies, and you're all going to be frustrated as all get out making more journal entries. So that's really the key, and that's really the very important thing when trying to pull a fund out of the pool, is make sure the confirm dates are the first day of that cycle. All right, keeping general ledger in sync with the facts module. So if general ledger and facts don't see the same values, facts could be allocating incorrectly. There is a report that can be run under reports in the facts module, and it's called Facts GL Comparison Report. And I can choose which pool that I actually want to run. I'm going to run it for all of my pools. And it's defaulting into current year and current period. Let me run this once so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so this is telling me that there are no out of balance funds. This is what you want to see because general ledger and facts are in sync and they're seeing the same thing. Let me rerun this and I'm going to uncheck differences only. So what this is looking at, just so you get some idea of the visual, even though I don't have any of my pools out of balance, the first column is the fund ID. The second column is what general ledger is seeing. And the third column is what is in the facts module. And they're both in sync, so it's going to allocate appropriately. Now, a couple things to think of when you're trying to keep your general ledger in sync with facts. On the pool record, there is a little checkbox here that says prevent manual transactions. Do not uncheck that because you do not want to create a manual transaction in facts, because if you do, facts is going to see a different balance for the fund than what general ledger does, and you don't want to do that. The other thing is to run this report once a quarter, once a month. It takes just depending on how long it takes, run it and make sure that you keep seeing that report saying there's no out of balance funds. Some things not to do, which could cause you to be out of balance. So don't create manual transactions in the facts module. Now, there are some exceptions, but I would suggest contacting support for help if you think you need to, and they'll make sure that that's your only option or that makes sense. So don't create manual transactions in facts. Don't delete any of the transactions from the facts module that come from general ledger, because again, facts is no longer going to see the same thing as what's in general ledger. Don't change any of the transactions in facts. Again, they'll now be different from general ledger. Another thing to keep in mind is, and this goes to a journal, this is from a journal key code perspective. Do not create a manual, don't create a journal entry in GL and give it a key code of FA. And the reason being is that journal key code tells general ledger to not send or create a transaction in the facts module. So you will have a transaction in GL that facts doesn't know about, and that'll throw you out of balance as well. So just some things to think about to help keep both general ledger and facts in sync. And I did put into the documentation some of the reasons why you might be out of sync. So if you run it and you do see something that doesn't look right, I put some tips in there to help you think about why that might be, what might be an issue. All right, our last thing here is an error that you might see when you're running your edit report. And it might be missing general ledger accounts. So when you're doing your edit report from facts, you might see that error. So some of the reasons that you might see that error is, let's say that your dividends line for this pool didn't have a GL account associated with it. But when you went and did your reconciliation, you did put a dollar amount in that dividends line. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to allocate something, but there's no GL account and it doesn't know what to do. Another issue could be that the fund itself doesn't actually have that dividend account. It's an actual account. It's part of your system, but the fund doesn't have it. So those are a couple reasons why you might get that error. And the last one is a report that I think is really very handy, your transaction entry listing. So this allows you to run a report. And because it's transaction entry, it's any transaction that has not cleared through fax yet. So if you wanted to see transactions from a previously closed cycle in fax, this isn't the way to get it. But this is handy because if you have lot pages and pages of transactions, I've had people be out of balance and they're like, well, where the heck is it? Normally, when you come in here and look, see you've got transactions, you can see them visually on the screen, but maybe you want to see, hey, what is the total of all transactions that are miscellaneous P or the total of all transactions that are gift P? This is where that journal key code can come in handy because you can group your transactions based on the journal key code. So if you know that you should have had $365,000 in gifts for this month, and when you run this report, the total of all transactions are only 300,000, then you'll know there's something in one of the gift records or something in a gift entry. So at least gives you a place to start to find these transactions. Now let me just run this report so you can actually see this. I need to find one that has transactions. Okay, equity pool A. So let me go to reports, transaction entry listing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to filter this so that I only get pool ID, equity pool A. So this is, I'm just filtering the data that I'm going to see. I also want to see only a specific confirm date. In this case, I've got all kinds of stuff out here. So let me do so March 1st to March 31st. And in order to get these transactions so that they're grouped in subtotal by type, if I go to my sorting tab, I can say tran type is how I'm going to sort and I'm going to subtotal. So if I run this report, I don't have anything during this period other than miscellaneous P, but it does give you the total. So if I had gift transactions in here or allocations and entries transactions in here, depending on how they flowed in the transaction type, they would be broken out by transaction type. So I might have a section for gifts. This is great if you've kind of got some idea of what the total amount of those transactions should have been. This is going to tell you quickly whether that works or not, or gives you a place to start looking to figure that out. Okay, I think that is it, unless anybody has anything specific
I
that
have a
I
couple
haven't.
questions for you, Robin.
Sure,
And Nathan was inquiring about the pool ID change and updated, and Leanne has already sent him instructions on that. But the second
perfect.
question was, can the account code for an account within a pool be changed? And I know we can change the name, but account code is actually grayed out. Can
There
only an
is
admin make that change?
No, there's a change investment account code right here. So there's a tool for that. You can change it, but you have to use the utility.
Perfect.
Yep.
And the next one was, will changing the pool ID or account code have any impacts on the general ledger or other implications?
No, it doesn't have any impact on general ledger because as far as general ledger is concerned, it just sees the GL account. There's no investment accounts that are tracked, and general ledger has no idea if there's one account attached to the pool or multiple accounts attached to the pool. It just knows what the GL account is for the pool, so it doesn't have any implications for GL other than some of the, like your labels, for example. If you changed one of your labels and changed unrealized gains to something else, this will impact GL because it's going to be in the description for the journal entry that goes back to general ledger. So this would, but not from an accounting perspective, just from a description perspective.
Great, that's helpful. I think that was all the outstanding questions we have. If
Okay.
anybody has any additional ones, we do have a couple minutes that we can do that.
Hope this was helpful to everybody. I know sometimes facts can be a little bit crazy to think about what happens over there.
Sure, sure. All right. Let's see if there was a beginning of the day box on next day. Beginning of day box on next day.
So there used to be a begin of day box on the transactions years ago. There is no begin of day box any longer because if I'm not mistaken, it's implied that it's begin of day when the transaction goes over. So there's no need to change or choose that box. And if
Okay.
Rick Schnitzler is on the line and I said something incorrect, please correct me.
He is not on the call, so
Okay.
let's see. Jim also asked about changing confirmation. I'm not sure what you mean there, Jim,
You can
unless that was part of
change,
it.
yep, you can change confirm dates on each transaction individually, one at a time, or you can use that utility that I showed today to change a whole batch of confirm dates if you need to.
Perfect.
And changing a confirm date doesn't have any impact on general ledger either, if that was part of the question, because the GL apply date is still the same in general ledger. The confirm date is just used for the allocations of the earnings in the FACS module.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. Jim, I hope that answered your questions. If there's any other questions, we still have a couple minutes or two. We'll keep an eye on that.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you. We will see you all in September. Will be our next Let's Talk Solutions, our FIMS edition. So we can't wait to see you all then. And I want to thank you all for coming. Please mark your calendar for Wednesday, September 11th, for our next Let's Talk Solutions. Oh, everybody's saying thank you. Thank you, Robin. That was wonderful. And so much information in a short amount of time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.